Very pleased to welcome to the show former Tory party leader, Sir Iain Duncan Smith. Welcome, Iain.
Oh, good. I was going to say good morning, good afternoon.
Yeah, we always get this wrong just as we go past the midday hour. Well, first of all, let me ask you for your take on what I think is a sort of triumph for the people, the victory over the government of Epping Forest District Council in their bid to have the Bell Hotel, their asylum seeker hotel, closed down because they said it was a danger to local people. The nature of the victory was this, that the government has basically been going round quietly commandeering hotels all over the country, surrounding them with steel barriers, blacking out the windows, putting security guards down around them, filling them with migrants, with people who broke into our country illegally, and still calling them hotels. The court said, well, they're no longer hotels. That has thrown the government into disarray and will no doubt trigger some kind of chain reaction of other councils taking similar legal action against the government. I think that's a good thing. What are your thoughts?
No, well, I agree. I think the Epping Council did us all a favour, really, by going back to law and saying you can't call these places hotels. And if they're not hotels, then they are migrant camps. And if they're migrant camps, then they need new rules because they're not at all protected. The public are not protected against possibility. You saw in this particular case, there was a 14-year-old girl that had been assaulted, or supposed to have been assaulted by somebody who was in the hotel. And they're far too close in to normal communities, which means they can pose a threat to them. And I can understand why Epping's gone to say, wrong place, the wrong time, and the wrong people.
Well, the Home Office, the government, was represented by Edward Brown, KC, eminent barrister.
Yeah.
Obviously, he's doing his job. I don't hold this against him personally, but his arguments, I thought, were a disgrace. They were a disgrace. What he said was that, you know, the balance of convenience, in other words, he classified the desires of the people of Epping for safety on the streets for women and children as a convenience, were nowhere near as important as the government's fundamental duty to the human rights of asylum seekers. I think that betrays a government that has got its priorities all wrong, don't you?
Sort of says it all, doesn't it, really? It thinks that a migrant that's arrived here illegally and is yet to be processed has a higher number of rights than the people who are officially resident and legally here, and their families, for that matter. That wasn't the beginning and the end of it. Actually, I think the judge was highly critical of the behaviour of the Home Office, said they were uncooperative, and that they set about dismissing this charge, really, which it's the judge's decision. This is not Home Office's, and they didn't help, and they didn't make a reasonable response to it. And what you see with the case put forward by the KC was an arrogant dismissal of the whole proposition, which makes you wonder, really, who is the Home Office for? Because they're clearly not for the British public who sit there and have to put up with this.
I thought the other outrageous nature of the government's, you can't call it a legal argument. It wasn't a legal argument. It was a sort of emotional argument in favour of these foreigners who break into our country illegally and their human rights. But his other argument was that, oh, well, if you let Epping Forest District Council get away with this, it will add up to a triumph for violent protests and will trigger more violent protests around the country. Now, here's the deal, Iain. For the last something like a couple of months, we've had many protests every weekend, and yes, some of them have been passionate, yes, some of them have been heated. There have been one or two flashpoints, often triggered by mask-wearing left-wingers and indeed right-wingers who converge on these scenes just for their own political reasons. But basically, you know, I know, everybody knows that these protests around the country outside asylum seeker hotels have been peaceful, and yet the government is characterising them as violent, and that this decision by the High Court is a victory for violent protests. They were not violent.
No, they weren't, and the vast majority have been very peaceful. They've been by local residents, not by people who come into the area. was characterised the Epping protests. They were not violent. They were very much about local people concerned about the safety and security of their children and of their loved ones. And so the reality is that this was a classic case of what English common law is meant to be all about, which is about people having a right to pursue their lives as they will without let or hindrance. And this is very much a case. So the government is now trying to bully the courts, which makes you laugh, really, because this was a group that used to lecture the Conservative government about not holding up the courts to high levels and not extolling their virtues whenever they make a judgment you disagree with. Here is a bunch of people that literally look like overpaid human rights lawyers themselves, who actually end up now having to criticise the court because they didn't agree with their judgment. So, you know, you couldn't make this up half the time. But the reality is most of these protests have been peaceful. And if the government is trying to say that they're all violent and nasty, then the government is stirring up trouble, because people will not like the fact that they've been mischaracterised as angry and furious and dangerous people when they are not. They are just local people, for the most part, protesting against something they think is wrong, and that is their right within the English common law.
Absolutely. Bear with us, if you will, Ian. I'm going to play now a clip from the Security Minister, Dan Jarvis, who was on the Today programme this morning, putting the government's case. I'm not exactly sure what he's on about, but see if you can work it out.
Would you at least answer, just so specifically, if it's not hotels, as Security Minister, what is it?
So for reasons that I completely understand, you're focusing on one particular bit of this problem, and I'm evidencing the activity right across the sort of the spectrum of the challenge in terms of the leveraging diplomatic relations with our partners internationally and stopping the flow of people getting to the northern beaches of France in the first place, which is my primary area of concern.
Well, I think that's just gobbledygook. If we can just talk for a second on the government's alleged bid to tackle the migrant crisis. We're now 2 weeks into one in, one out, which is supposed to be a deterrent. You know, that's Macron and Starmer's bizarre swap a foreigner deal. And since then, something like 2,500 migrants across the channel. So the deterrent clearly has not worked, is not working. So far, the mathematics is this. It's 2,500 in, none out. So that's not working. We've got the hotel policy in disarray. The smash the gangs seems to have died a tragic death. They're not saying that anymore. This is out of control, and the government seems to have no way or no method of tackling what is an escalating crisis.
Well, number one, you need a deterrent. People are paying. There's a sort of mystique about the idea of these people clambering on boats because it's nice people giving them the boats and they sail across the channel and risk their lives. That's not the case. To get on these boats, they've had to pay thousands of pounds of all their savings gone to get on a boat, risk their lives to get across. Why? Because they believe if they set foot in the UK, they will never have to leave. And they're probably right about that, as things stand at the moment. So the government comes in without any policy at all. They're having voted against the Rwanda scheme, which, by the way, was a deterrent. Even when it was first announced, you suddenly saw waves of these illegal migrants heading for Ireland, camped out in the streets of Dublin. I don't know if you remember all of that. That was because they feared being sent to Rwanda. Of course, when that collapsed under the judgments and the rows about it, it should have been taking place. But the only deterrent we had was you're going somewhere else. Now, without a deterrent, it doesn't matter what this government does, they will not reduce the numbers of migrants. Because if you're going to pay thousands of pounds to risk your life, then you are going to take an awful lot until you are deterred. And that the only deterrence at work is to say, if you set foot here, you will be turned around and you will be sent somewhere else. And you'll have wasted your money, wasted your time, risked your children, risked yourself for nothing because you won't be allowed to stay here. Their nonsense about smashing the gangs. What do they think? Government after government has tried to smash the gangs. As soon as you get one gang out of the way, another one pops up because there's such a lot of money involved in it. And the second bit about one out, one in is total rubbish because it's not one out, one in. It'll be one out, about 15 in because, of course, if they're allowed in legally, they can bring their families with them. So suddenly this whole one-on-one is complete rubbish. And by the way, the stuff that some of my colleagues in the Conservative Party in the shadow cabinet did about filming, Robert Jenrick and co, filming the migrants on their way to the beaches, not being stopped by the police not interested when they were spotted where they were going and informed, all of that is a reality. So all this chucking money at the French police and the French government makes them laugh, really, because they don't mind if these people head off to England.
Of course they don't. They want to wave them.
Stick around in the part of Calais.
Yeah, they want to wave them au revoir and don't come back.
It's a disaster. The whole thing's a disaster.
Exactly right. And I wish, Ian, that the Labour government or Labour cabinet ministers could be prevailed upon to stop lying to the public. Every time they're asked about the Prime Minister's ludicrously juvenile and impetuous decision on day one of his disastrous administration to chuck the Rwanda scheme down the drain, wasting £700 million worth of taxpayers' investment, they say, well, it didn't work. Well, here's the deal. It didn't start. It didn't start. They must stop lying to us about this.
Well, the other thing, by the way, is America's using the Rwanda scheme now. Because they've sent illegal migrants over to Rwanda. Countries in Europe, by the way, are talking about, can they now do something like the Rwanda scheme? We are the only country that's in retreat over this. Others are fed up as well, by the way, with the Convention of Human Rights. The Italians are fed up with, the French have already criticised it, and yet you try and criticise that problem with courts ruling. I mean, you saw the other day an individual who's, been a criminal, was allowed to stay here because of his human rights. It's ridiculous.
Every single time. Can I get a few words from you before you go, Sir Iain? It's always great to have you on board. Thank you so much for your time. A few words on the Ukraine situation. The President of the United States, Donald Trump, who I should say should be commended and applauded for what he's achieved in at least moving the dial, getting Putin vaguely to the table, talking to the European leaders, etc., and Zelensky. He is now saying that, look, should some kind of agreement be reached with Putin to end hostilities, I think that's a long shot personally, but that's another issue. But he says, should some kind of agreement be reached, there will have to be a peacekeeping force in Ukraine. America will give every support it can to that, except for boots on the ground. But he also said, but that may involve European boots on the ground, including British boots on the ground. Very generous of him, I thought. But what do you think of that? Do you think it is possible British soldiers will end up in Ukraine keeping the peace?
Well, I suppose if the government says that they are prepared to take part in this so-called coalition of the willing, I suppose that might be the case. My concern would be, I don't trust Putin one little bit. It isn't that he just wants this bit of land. Putin has never accepted that Ukraine is an independent state. He's never accepted that Zelensky was elected properly, and he wants Ukraine. He's made that absolutely clear from day one. This is only a staging post. If there was a peace, so-called peace agreement, and he kept territory, which I think is an abomination when you think that he invaded.
Yes, agreed.
If he did that, he'll come back for more. I mean, Hitler did that. He does that. All the dictators of history never give up because they believe they're right, and they will do whatever it takes. They don't care about human life. He's got 1 million people that have been killed or injured as a result of his invasion on the Russian side alone, and something like 300,000 to 400,000 killed or wounded on the Ukrainian side because he decided to go to war with them. That is the kind of bloke you're dealing with. So all I would say is be very careful to the government about what you commit to at the moment, because there will be big caveats in all of this. And if we put 5,000 or 10,000 troops on the ground, it is like a drop of rain in the scale of the war that they've got at the moment. I've been out there. I've been at the front line. I've been in Kharkiv, which was bombed the other day. I can tell you now, the Ukrainians are unbelievably brave, very stoic, and they get on with it. But what they don't want is our boots on the ground. What they do want is absolutely to have the weapons to fight this war and to drive the Russians out. And I have to tell you, they could, if they'd been properly given the weapons, have dealt with that by now.
I mean, we all pray for peace. We'd love that war to end. But do you share, and I'm sorry to say this, but do you share my pessimism that Putin may well, or is probably likely, to sort of swing a wrecking ball through all of these talks by probably saying, I want the Donbass, I want Crimea, and I want a lot more of Ukraine as well, at which point the Ukrainian people will just say no?
I think it's almost certain that if he goes on asking for territory like that, which is basically territory he hasn't yet invaded, by the way, a third of the area of Luhansk is actually still is still held by the Ukrainians, and some very, very critical cities that act as a protection buffer against further advances of the Russians. If that's given away, it'll be like giving away the Sudetenland in 1938 to the Germans, because people forget this. They say, oh, well, you know, I said there were 1 million men under arms in Czechoslovakia, and that area was mountainous, full of forts, full of fortifications. The Germans were really scared stiff of trying to invade that. We gave it to them, and so they came back for more. They took Czechoslovakia within 6 months, I think, 7 months of their time, and then they moved on to Poland. This is what he does. Putin will do the same. Our only answer is we have to defeat him. He's a threat and a danger to us all. He's allied with China, North Korea and Iran. We are up against it, but we won't recognise it, and we're playing games at the moment.
Sir Iain Duncan Smith, thank you so much for your time. Great to talk to you. Thank you. Iain Duncan Smith, their former Tory leader, let me know about some of the things he was saying. I mean, agreeing with me about the asylum seeker hotel situation. Absolute disgrace. That was the government's argument. It wasn't a legal argument. It was, the human rights of asylum seekers are the fundamental, most important thing of this government. No. The most important thing to this government, any government of Britain, should be British citizens. And yet, Edward Brown, KC, let it be known that the government sees its sacred duty first to the human rights of migrants who break into this country illegally. They also outrageously claimed that people all over the country were staging violent protests against their asylum seeker hotels, their local asylum seeker hotels. That's a lie. These protests have not been violent. So you get the sense, don't you, that what Keir Starmer and the Cabinet almost want, I wouldn't accuse them of really desiring this, but I think they wouldn't mind if one of these protests got really violent, loads of arrests, bricks being thrown, all that kind of stuff, so they could revert to their default setting of calling decent, honest citizens who just want safety on their streets far-right thugs. That's what I think they want. To say that these protests have been violent, it's not true, and it's a disgrace. Their entire argument in the High Court yesterday, I'm not having a go at Edward Brown KC, he's a barrister, he was fighting for the Home Office, he was doing his job, but his arguments were an outrage, an absolute outrage.